My name is Steve. I'm turning 46 this year. I work in sales at the American branch of a Spanish electronics manufacturer. I've always enjoyed my job, where I can use my Spanish skills that I've been good at since my school days. It's fun and very rewarding. When I was younger, I spent about 3 years assigned to our headquarters in Spain, and I've been back several times for training and business trips. Because of my busy life, I never had time for romance, and without many chances to meet someone, I remained single well past 45. But last year, fate stepped in. On my way back from visiting a client, as I was walking down the main street in front of the station, a tall man walking in front of me suddenly collapsed. He was clutching his abdomen in pain and groaning. I rushed to his side and crouched down asking, "Are you okay?" But when I looked at his face, he seemed like a foreigner. Then he spoke to me in Spanish. "My chest hurts, please call an ambulance." Understood. "I'll call one immediately." I responded in Spanish too and dialed 911 on my cell phone. While I was on the phone, a woman approached us. "What's happened here?" She looked to be a classy woman about 60 years old. "This man says he's having chest pains," I explained. Then she spoke to the fallen foreigner in Spanish. "I'm a nurse, can you tell me exactly where and how it hurts?" After that, she neatly placed her rolled-up jacket under the man's head and checked his pulse while asking about his condition. When the ambulance arrived, she explained the man's condition in detail to the paramedics and accompanied them in the ambulance. Watching her take charge, I thought she was pretty impressive. I saw her again when my dad, who lives alone, was hospitalized for colon polyp surgery. She was the nurse in charge of my dad's room. "Hey, you're the one from the other day." "Oh my, thank you for that time." It seems she remembered me too. "Thank you for that time too, you were a lifesaver." "Was that man okay?" "Yes, because you called the ambulance right away," she said with a bright smile. "You're really good at Spanish, aren't you?" "Not really, it's all self-taught." "You studied Spanish by yourself?" "Yeah, I've always loved watching movies and foreign TV shows, so I got interested in Spanish. I learned by watching language programs on TV and buying books." "That's impressive. Seemed like you could speak Spanish too." "Well, I work for the American branch of a Spanish company, so I can speak a little." "Really? Have you ever been to Spain then?" "Yes, I have." She too had been to Spain on a trip. After that, we started talking every time we saw each other. Her name was Michelle and she was about to turn 60. She was a cheerful person with a lovely smile and talking to her was so enjoyable. I always wanted to chat more. Looking back, I realized I was totally smitten with her from the first glance. The age difference didn't matter to me. She was such an attractive woman. In our conversations, I learned she was divorced and currently single. Michelle has a daughter, but she's married and has left the house. So, I figured it wouldn't be a problem to ask her out. With that in mind, on the day my dad was discharged from the hospital, I asked her for her contact information. She readily agreed and we exchanged numbers. Then right after I got home, I asked her out to dinner. Since then, we've had dinner together several times and gone to the movies. The more I learned about her, the more I was drawn to her charm. She was kind and considerate to everyone, always bright and positive, and whenever I was tired from work or had something bothering me, talking to her would cheer me up. After about 6 months of dating, I proposed to her. "Michelle, will you marry me?" When I showed her the ring I had prepared and told her my feelings, she looked at me with her big, teary eyes and said, "Are you sure an older lady like me is okay? Age is just a number. I've got my heart set on you, Michelle. I can't imagine being with any other woman. I want to live the rest of my life with you." I said as I took her hand, and she began to cry. "Thank you, I want to spend my life with you too, Steve," she answered. And with that, she accepted my proposal. She had decided against having a wedding ceremony, but when she turned 60 and retired from her nursing career, I seized the moment to take a 10-day vacation. We went on a honeymoon to Hawaii. This trip was not only a celebration of her 60th birthday but also her retirement, so we really went all out. We stayed at luxury hotels and ate at 5-star restaurants. Since I'd been single until I was 45 and didn't have any expensive hobbies, I had a good amount of savings. That's how we managed to go on such an extravagant trip. Michelle was overjoyed. Seeing her having the time of her life like a young girl, I knew it was worth it. Returning from our trip about 6 months into our married life, one morning as usual I headed to work and was called in by my boss. The president of a major client from our headquarters in Spain is coming to America with his wife for a trip. We'll be hosting a dinner reception, so please attend with your wife as well. My boss, Director Frank, said that and then specified the date and time. I'll let you know the venue once it's decided. Understood. As I was jotting down notes in my planner, Frank suddenly laughed. Ha! Well, I've heard you got yourself a wife. I was starting to think you'd end up a bachelor for life, but good for you for finding a woman with such unique tastes. Those scornful eyes were staring at me. Frank is only 2 years older than me, but his pride and joy has always been his much younger and beautiful wife, and he's always taken every chance to mock me. Stuff like, you must be lonely being single at your age, or there's no way a woman with any sense would want to marry a guy like you. He's looked down on me forever. But to still be hearing this kind of taunt even after I got married. I was fed up with it but kept my silence, worried that my wife would be subject to some unpleasant comments if I introduced her to such a boss. But since it was an order, I had no choice. We would have to attend. On the day of the dinner, I took Michelle to the designated restaurant. It was a high-end place for Italian cuisine. When I mentioned the name of the organizer to make our reservation and was led to the private room, there were Frank and his wife. Frank had every reason to brag. His wife indeed had the beauty of a model. Sorry to keep you waiting, Frank. As I greeted him, my boss Frank looked over his wife who stood behind him and said, Steve, why did you bring your mom along? I thought the deal was you'd bring your wife. Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. Frank had a spiteful smirk at the corner of his mouth. He probably knew exactly what he was doing, saying it on purpose. Harassment like this is almost a form of art. That's not my mother. Let me introduce to you. This is my wife, Michelle. Michelle, this is my boss, Director Frank. Oh, my apologies. You're his wife. I mistook you for his mother because of your distinguished appearance. Frank continued with such rude remarks. Glancing over, I noticed that Michelle was giving a strained smile while remaining silent. She was forcing a laugh, but I bet it was hurting her on the inside. I couldn't forgive Frank for hurting my wife. If he dared to say something that insulting again, I resolved to hit back hard next time. After a while, our client from the headquarters, Richard, showed up with a young employee as his guide. Nice to meet you. I'm Richard. Excuse me, but my wife Emma is currently in the restroom, so I'll introduce you to her shortly. Richard said that in Spanish. Frank and his wife, as well as Michelle and I, all introduced ourselves in Spanish. It seemed like Frank's wife wasn't very good at Spanish. Apart from stating her name, she barely spoke, and whenever Richard asked her something, Frank answered for her. In contrast, Michelle, whose Spanish was fluent, was happily chatting with Richard. Seeing this, Frank and his wife looked displeased. Anyway, Steve, how did you get up the nerve to marry a woman so much older than you? Frank started speaking in English abruptly. No matter how well she speaks Spanish, what's so good about a lady that looks her age? Everyone knows younger women are preferable, or maybe you've got a thing for older women. How old is she anyway? Frank was speaking his mind without restraint. Indeed, Michelle did look her age at 60, and certainly didn't look young. But she had a beauty that comes with age, and her personality was wonderful. That's why I fell for her. To have her ridiculed with such harsh words, it felt like a complete denial of my love for my wife. Boss, don't you think that's incredibly rude? I said, my fist clenched and shaking. What? You're going to talk back to me, your boss? Frank said with a smirk. Richard, who didn't understand English, looked puzzled. There are things you can and cannot say even as a boss. He can say whatever he wants about me. I've been ready for it since I married you, Michelle said as she tugged at my sleeve. That's when it happened. The private room's door opened, and a foreign woman escorted by an employee came in. Emma, over here everyone, let me introduce you to my wife Emma, Richard said, standing up. Emma was a tall woman around 60 years old. When she took the seat next to Richard, she glared at Frank and began speaking in fluent English. I heard what was being said. I am very displeased right now. Apologize to them immediately, she demanded sternly, leaving Frank open-mouthed and frozen. I'm also 9 years older than Richard. What's so wrong with a wife being older than her husband? The notion that a woman needs to be younger to be appreciated is repulsive to me. Emma was fuming. Frank turned as white as a ghost. In a panic, he bowed his head to Emma. I'm terribly sorry, not to me, apologize to him and her, Emma said, still angry. Then Frank turned to me and my wife and bowed deeply. Steve, and to your wife, I'm terribly sorry for my rudeness, please forgive me. Unaware of the situation, Emma told the whole conversation to Richard in Spanish. Richard's face turned red with anger. What a rude man you are. I don't want to dine with someone who speaks so thoughtlessly. I'm leaving. It was Emma who calmed down the fuming Richard, who had shouted in Spanish. Well, he has apologized, so let's forgive him. No way, I can't forgive him. Please leave now and never make such comments again. Richard's anger did not settle and Frank, still pale, went home with his wife looking downcast. Then we introduced ourselves to Emma again. Pleased to meet you, I'm Michelle, the wife of Steve Richardson. Hearing Michelle introduce herself, Emma's eyes widened. Michelle, are you Michelle Richardson? Yes, that's me. Oh my God. I'm Emma Anderson, your email friend. Excited, Emma switched to speaking in Spanish. What? You're Emma? Michelle also looked incredibly surprised. The two of them joyfully clasped hands over this coincidence. Listening to their conversation, it turned out they had met on an internet forum and had been exchanging emails for over 20 years. Michelle had taught Emma English, and Emma had been teaching Michelle Spanish. So that's why Emma could speak English. Michelle was too shy, so they had never done a video call before. It seems they didn't know what each other looked like. What an amazing coincidence, though, to meet an email friend from overseas like this, and at such a place. The party really got going with Emma and Michelle's conversation at the center. The food brought out was delicious, and Richard and Emma enjoyed it too. Man, what a great day. I can forgive Frank's remark, but I'm truly happy that Emma and Michelle met by chance. Richard had also heard about Emma's longtime email friend before. I've really been looking forward to trying authentic Italian cuisine, and I'm totally satisfied. I'll be sure to tell the folks back at the headquarters in Spain about this. After the meal, saying this, Richard left with Emma. Seems the dinner was a success. Later that day, back at home, Michelle said to me, Steve, thank you for standing up to Frank earlier. I acted tough, but if you had gone along with Frank, it would have really shocked me. I'm relieved and glad that you stood up to him. Of course I'd stand up to anyone. I can tolerate anyone talking awful about my dear Michelle, but Michelle, you said you were prepared for this when we got together. I had no idea you felt that way. Gotta admit it was a bit of a shock, but we have a 14-year age gap. I don't exactly look young, and to outsiders a age difference is pretty obvious, right? I was braced for some remarks. It was a relief that your parents didn't object and were supportive of our marriage, so that's what it was. You needed that kind of resolve to marry me. Still, thanks for marrying me, Michelle. Don't mention it. The happiness I feel being with you makes all that trivial. Michelle said this with a bright smile. Seeing her smile, I fell even deeper in love with her. A few days after Richard returned to Spain, my company called to say a major deal with his company had gone through. Richard had made a point of sending his regards to me. Apparently, Richard had also reported Frank's nasty comments to the headquarters, and as a result, Frank got demoted to a regular employee. And in his place, I was promoted to department head, effectively reversing our positions. Since that day, Frank stopped making condescending remarks towards me. He became utterly submissive, and seeing him bow was incredibly satisfying. Michelle and Emma continued to exchange emails and calls, staying good friends. It looks like Michelle is now planning a trip to Barcelona where Emma lives. Watching her talk excitedly about it, I want to protect that smile for as long as I can. I want to make her happy. My name is John Williams, a 30-year-old businessman. There's nothing special to note about me. I'm just working as an office clerk at a large wholesaler for alcohol. We don't have a store, but we do deliver beer and wine on credit to a wide variety of eateries, such as bars and izakayas. Each delivery person is in charge of a truck, and when morning comes, they load a barrels of beer and deliver to the stores they're in charge of. As for me, I'm working in an office with only women, handling things like processing credit slips and various chores. I think I've been placed here because they need at least one male hand in the office. Still, it's true that I often have bad experiences because I'm looked down on by people like the driver, the procurement personnel, and the warehouse manager. On top of that, the general affairs department is a women's garden. I feel uncomfortable. I often feel stressed because it feels like I'm caught on the horns of a dilemma. But the reason I'm still at this company is because not everything is bad. I have many colleagues I get along with, and I often get treated well by our regular customers. There are times for ups and downs. It would be the same no matter where I work. The change in my life happened this spring. The cause was a new department manager who joined the company in the middle of the term. He was a tough guy with a background in finance, having served as a branch manager of a regional bank. He had a tendency to try to settle everything with numbers. The department manager was rough from the start. Perhaps he felt pressured to produce results because he was hired in the middle of the term. His demands on us were too high. Suddenly, the previously laid-back atmosphere in the office started to get tense. According to what the section chief secretly told me, it seems that the director is suggesting personnel cuts to the president. Indeed, there have been fewer drinking parties recently, and opportunities for outside drinking have been lost. It's a big blow to our company, which delivers alcohol to restaurants. I knew that sales were sluggish. When I heard about this from the team leader, I had a bad feeling. This was because, as far as the director was concerned, my performance seemed to be at rock bottom, and I was well aware that he had me in his sights. Perhaps being the only man among the clerks might give the impression of being incompetent. I had the impression that I was doing a decent job, but the director didn't seem to recognize my efforts at all. In a month after the director took office, the discussions about reduction began. It started with soliciting voluntary retirees. Apparently, no one expressed a desire to leave. The director then prepared a list for the reduction. My name was at the top. He subtly applied pressure, saying it's not mandatory, but if you care about the company. Besides me, several delivery personnel and assistants were chosen. It seemed like an arbitrary selection on the director's part. The warehouse keeper's name was on the list, and he was outraged. And rightly so. If the warehouse keeper quit, the company would be thrown into chaos. Because no one else can find a single bottle of wine in the huge warehouse. The president didn't seem to like the list either, but he had difficulty expressing his opinion to the director, who was an elite from the banking world. Even those whose names were on the downsizing list didn't willingly apply to resign just because their names were there. The company atmosphere was like, let's ignore the list, but the director didn't like that. Salespeople aren't in the company during the day. During the day, the director's target was me, the only one left in the office. Even when he didn't have anything to do, he kept loitering around my desk and nitpicking. I sincerely wished he would just stay cooped up in his office. Are you doing only that job every day? You have tons of work because you're slow. The director would lean over my work and scold me in an unnecessarily loud voice. I guess he wanted everyone in the office to hear. Every day, the office atmosphere got worse because of his yelling, and the director blamed it on me. He said that the reason the employees' motivation isn't increasing is because I'm in the company. I was stunned to be told that being calced incompetent and a burden to the company every day was really wearing me down. My stress was reaching its limit. I'm convinced that the reason I blacked out and collapsed while trying to get up from my chair at the office was due to the director. I don't remember anything after falling, but apparently, I was quickly rushed to the hospital by an ambulance. I heard from my colleagues that I had been unconscious and appeared to be suffering since I collapsed. It turns out stress was indeed the direct cause of my collapse. It was a result of a dreadful pattern of stress, leading to insomnia and overwork. When they performed the tests upon my emergency arrival at the hospital, the attending physician told me that there seemed to be other worrisome symptoms, which surprised me a bit. It turned out I would have to continue with further diagnostic tests. The results of these thorough tests revealed early-stage colon cancer. Receiving a cancer diagnosis was quite a shock, but I was a little reassured when the doctor told me that since it was in the early stages, there was a high likelihood of complete recovery with surgery. A hospital stay for tests turned out to be a much longer hospitalization than I anticipated, which was bothering me. Just as I thought my hospital stay might drag on a bit longer and contacted my office, the document that the secretary, now named as Nancy, brought me was early retirement papers. She looked very apologetic as she handed them to me, saying she was told by the director to deliver them. Thank you, who've asked the nasty task. When I spoke to Nancy, who had brought the documents, she told me you should just ignore such papers. Of course, I don't want to take early retirement. I shoved the envelope into the drawer of the bedside table in my hospital room. John will take your temperature and blood pressure now. The nurse came named Kathy, replacing Nancy in the room. The first time I saw her, I was so struck by her beauty that I didn't even realize when the injection was over. Ah yes, please go ahead. I get overly nervous when Kathy comes in. Her being extremely beautiful is one reason why I get so nervous. On top of that, she never smiles. She's called Iron Mask by the inpatients. It seems her fellow nurses also call her that. Kathy's expressionlessness and her good looks make her appear doubly intimidating. It's not that she's cold or anything like that to the patients. She's a strict yet kind nurse. The young attending physician told me that he's most afraid of being scolded by her. She doesn't raise her voice but seems to be able to express her anger in a quiet, matter-of-fact way. I thought I would be terrified if it were me. Your pulse is a bit fast. Are you not feeling well? Kathy, who was taking my pulse, quietly said so. It seems my pulse quickens just by having her near me. I was a little amazed at how nervous I was. I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me. As I hastily said that, Katie stared at me fixedly. And then she let out a small sigh. I started to panic, wondering if I had disappointed her. Her sigh was not one of disappointment. Don't just dismiss things lightly as okay. You're here to fight a disease. Remember, if you're feeling bad or if there's even a slight difference from your norm, make sure to tell us, Kathy said with a serious expression. Then she deeply bows in my direction, apologizing for her inadequacy. Wait, why? You don't need to apologize for anything, Kathy. I understand there's a certain atmosphere around me that makes it hard for you to open up. I'm really sorry about that. I wonder if Kathy knows what people call her behind her back. I gently look at her face, wondering if she's hurt. Her usual expressionless face is there. I'll be a good patient. My words slip out awkwardly as I don't know what to say. Iron-faced Kathy's eyes widen in surprise. Then, she quickly returns to her usual expression and simply responds, I appreciate that. I suddenly feel embarrassed and couldn't say a single word until Kathy left the room. Hospital life is surprisingly busy with continuous tests before surgery. Today, I didn't return to my room until past 3 p.m. after the tests. Dragging my test-weary body into my room, I find that there's already someone there. It's my boss. Just seeing him doubles my exhaustion from the tests. He notices me return to the room and without any words of consolation, just says, hey. I don't feel like responding, but he's still my boss, even if he's not the most pleasant. As an employee, I don't have much room to argue. Quietly, I just sat down on the edge of the bed. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Director. That's the unwritten rule for employees, I suppose. My apology was met with a condescending nod from the director. I've heard you're in for a long stay. Have you received the early retirement forms? Why haven't you submitted them yet? The company would be better off without deadweight like you. He spoke to me as though I were a child, which got under my skin. I must have let my irritation show. The director gave a nasty grin. He was trying to rile me up, I knew that, but his attitude was hard to stomach. You came all this way to tell me that I'm sorry for the trouble, but I have no intention of retiring early. I tried to choose my words carefully, trying to stay as calm as possible. Really, I wanted to shout him down and send him packing. The director smirked as if he could read my thoughts, and he didn't stop. If I caused a scene here, he might use that as an excuse to fire me. The tension hung in the air between the director and me like a standoff. The one who shattered that tension was Nurse Kathy. Excuse me, I believe I asked you to call me with the nurse call button once you returned from your tests. Have you forgotten? The hospital room door burst open, and in strode Nurse Kathy, glancing back and forth between the director and me. I'm sorry, but can you please leave the room? Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable authority in it. She shot the director a frosty stare, explaining, he's tired from his tests. What a rude nurse, I'm this man's superior. And the director rose from his chair, glaring at Nurse Kathy. But she simply pointed to the door and repeated, please leave. Boss, that doesn't matter here. This is a place where you follow the doctor's and nurse's instructions. You think being a boss works everywhere. The director's face turned beech red at that. It was like she'd called him out for flaunting his petty power. How dare you, I'll remember your name. With a parting shot, the director stormed out of the room like he was running away. I listened to the receding footsteps, letting out a sigh of relief. Would you like to lie down? Kathy, as if nothing had happened, helps me to comfortably lay down. After laying down, all the exhaustion came to me. Why don't you take a nap until it's time for dinner? As she suggests this, she pulls the blanket up to my shoulders. I can't help but feel a little shy. Thank you, that man, he's a bit of a problematic boss. I appreciate you sending him away. As Kathy is about to leave the room, I call out to her, and she slowly turns around. In her flat tone she says, "It's my job." Right, but still I wanted to say thank you. Upon hearing this, her hand, which was on the doorknob, stops. And slowly she turns back towards me. Kathy looks at me with a strange expression. The moment I thought her feelings briefly showed on her face returns to its usual expressionless iron mask. Without saying anything more, she leaves the room. Fortunately, the surgery was successful, and I continued my treatment towards recovery. My body was at its limit due to stress. Even after the surgery, I was told to rest properly. During my lengthy hospital stay, I set a goal for myself. That was to see Kathy's smile by the time I was discharged. I really wanted to see her smile. I also had a feeling that I wanted to grab attention. Apparently, the director had visited the hospital several times after my surgery, but he never made it to my room. I was surprised to hear from another nurse that Kathy had turned him away every time. I was nothing but grateful to Kathy. I was attracted to her. All the strategies I came up with to see her smile ended in failure. Whether I prepared a horse mask or practiced magic tricks, everything was a bust. When I shared my Make Kathy Laugh project with other nurses, the news spread throughout the hospital. Getting advice from other patients, brainstorming strategies together, my hospital life quickly became more fulfilling. Yesterday, finally, a seemingly exasperated Kathy told me to focus on my treatment since I'm the patient. From then on, every time I tried to make her laugh, I get scolded with the same line. One day, as my discharge date was approaching, I got an urgent call on my cell phone from my colleague Laura. There had been a customer who was a regular complainer, making numerous complaints every day, causing work to be disrupted. Normally, I would be the one dealing with this customer. The complaints were usually about simple things like wrong order or late delivery. Nothing too serious. But this time it seemed the customer was extremely angry because they received a different product than the one they ordered. I understand the situation, but I'm in the hospital. If you can't handle it, just escalate it to upper management. Let them deal with all of it. I advised. Normally, I could handle most complaints at my level. But this time, I'm afraid the bosses would have to step up. Laura said she would do that and hung up. The complainer was a guy named Mr. Ferguson, who ran a couple of bars and snack joints. He could be a bit tricky at times, but he wasn't unreasonable. As long as the first step in handling the complaint was correct, there shouldn't have been any problems. I've never experienced a complaint so severe that the phone didn't stop ringing for days. The day after Laura's call, my boss barged into my hospital room. He burst past the nurses who were trying to stop him, giving me quite a surprise. "Director, what's going on?" His forehead was covered in sweat, and his usually crisp suit looked somewhat worn out. "You've been handling that complainer and smoothing things over. It's your responsibility. Contact him and sort this out. Now." He tossed the company's cell phone at me, which made me feel exasperated. I did not pick up the company's cell phone, so the director kept yelling at me, saying that I should be grateful that a useless person like me could be of use. I was starting to worry about causing a disturbance in the hospital. Reluctantly, I picked up the company's cell phone. "Is it you again? This is a hospital. Please keep it down." Just as I was about to make the call, Kathy entered the room. The nurse who had initially tried to stop the boss had apparently fetched Kathy from another ward. She was stone cold, glaring at the director without flinching. With her imposing demeanor, the director was taken aback. "I'm giving this good-for-nothing some work. Don't meddle with company affairs. You're just a nurse." Just as the boss's tirade was coming to an end, Kathy swiftly grabbed the company's cell phone from my hand. Then she shoved it into the director's chest pocket, rather forcefully. "From this moment, this room is off-limits to visitors. Why don't you go back and do your own job?" Kathy said as she pushed the boss out of the room and closed the door behind him. I heard a click as a sign was hung on the doorknob. It must be a no visitors sign. I could hear the director yelling outside the room. He made a ruckus for a while, but it seemed like he was escorted out by the security guards who came rushing. In the end, from what I heard from another nurse, he was even begging Nurse Kathy. I did feel a bit sorry for him, but I think it served as a good lesson for the director. Afterwards, it appears that the director got more complaints from a customer while handling a complaint. In the end, our regular client, Mr. Ferguson, said he would switch to another liquor store, effectively terminating his contract with us. It was a major blow to the company, and after a thorough investigation into the cause of the complaint, a revelation came to light. The director had rearranged the office on his own, and it seems a new and experienced worker had been put in charge of order reception. With no one to assist, the newbie was left to handle everything on their own. That's when the mistakes at the receptionist started piling up and caused the complaint. There are so many types of alcohol that you can't count them all. Without an experienced receptionist, it's difficult to understand specific wine brands. Normally, an experienced office worker would be assisting the newbie, but the director jumped the gun with the reorganization for cost-cutting, causing chaos throughout the office and the entire company. When the cause of the huge loss to the company was reported to the CEO, his reputation took a nosedive. Now he's been labeled as incompetent despite being an elite, and seems to be finding it hard to stay in the company. What are you writing? Kathy, who came to change my drip, peered at my computer screen. I'm writing my own know-how on dealing with complaints. The method varies depending on the customer. Now, that director seems to have been assigned to handle complaints. The director, while retaining his title, has been told to take the lead in handling complaints. A colleague told me that he's been tormented every day by troublesome complainants. I think it would be a plus for both the customers and the company if I could contribute to handling complaints in any way. Are you going to aid the enemy? I get slightly embarrassed as she tells me this with a somewhat unresolved look. I'd rather see a smile on your face than that shocked look. In the end, I never got to see a smile on Kathy's face during my hospital stay. After a hospital life of over a month, I finally reached the day of my discharge. The attending physician and nurses who took care of me in the ward see me off at the hospital entrance. I'm about to get emotional as I even receive a bouquet of flowers as a discharge celebration. Kathy is also here among the people seeing me off. With her usual emotionless face, she stares at me. I've been in your care a lot, Kathy. When I stand in front of Kathy to express my gratitude, I end up witnessing something unbelievable. You did well, John. Congratulations on your discharge. With that, she softly flashes a smile, as beautiful as a blossoming flower. I'm about to drop the bouquet in my hands from the surprise. I thought to myself, what a terrible woman she was at the end. After all the effort, she wouldn't smile at me, but at the moment we'd never see each other again, she shows me a smile. Memories of my hospitalization with her cross my mind one after another. Once I start to recall the fun moments, I can't hold back anymore. I burst into tears in reaction to her smile. Seeing this, the people sending me off start to roar with laughter. I'm so embarrassed, unable to hold myself back. I crouch down on the spot. Well, do not cry like that. People who work hard deserve a little reward. This is just a bonus. Kathy whispers this while gently patting my crushed back. A piece of notepaper, roughly inscribed with her familiar handwriting, has her cell phone number on it, and she gently places it in my hand. Below it are the words, "Contact me if you feel like it, I'll be waiting." By the time I stop crying in surprise and look up, she's already returned to the send-off line, waving with her emotionless face. I wave back at everyone while expressing my thanks, then get into a taxi. In the moment I get in, I call Kathy's cell phone. You're impatient, aren't you? After 5 rings, she answers the phone with a soft chuckle. I hadn't thought about how to ask her out, and can't find the words in my sudden panic. Will you date me with the intention of marriage? This was the first thing that came out. Even the taxi driver turns around in surprise. I'm so embarrassed I wish I could disappear into a hole. Isn't that a bit too hasty, but okay. Perhaps I found the treasure of my life in a hospital, and I was too lucky. A few years later, I can't help but grin imagining her standing next to me in a white bridal dress. How did you enjoy today's story? Subscribe the channel and give us likes. It gives us motivation for our production activities. We're also looking forward to hearing your comments. See you during the lunch break at work. After eating lunch with my colleagues, I was reading a comic book at my own desk. Even when the bell rang to let us know the end of the lunch break, I was engrossed in the story, wanting to read just one more page. Then somebody tapped me on the shoulder from behind. When I turned around, it was my direct superior, the department head. In a hurry, I opened the drawer and threw in the comic book. "Hey Johnson, you got a moment? Could you come to the conference room with me?" The department head spoke to me in the same mild and gentle tone as always. Immediately, I got up from my seat and followed the department head to the conference room. When we entered the empty conference room, the department head asked me if I wasn't going to take any more paid leaves. In the previous month, I sporadically took day offs almost every week. What about it, Johnson? Are you going to take some day offs this month or not? Saying that, the department head gave me a sharp stare. As I was lost for words to reply, the department head spoke ruthlessly. You don't want to work with me, do you? As you wished, you're going to be let go from my department and also from the head office. The department head told me that this was a transfer order. I had no right to refuse and I was forced to either follow the transfer order or quit the company. So you mean I'm being demoted that night? When I got home, I told my girlfriend Mary about the situation. I'd been living with her for almost 7 years. I was forced by the department head to choose between following the transfer order or quitting the company, and I chose to stay in the company. The place I was being transferred to was a sales office in a remote area in the Midwest. Mary asked me why I was being demoted. When I hesitated to answer, Mary said, "Could it be that you were trying to change jobs and the company found out?" She hit the nail on the head. With a stunned face, Mary sighed. She said that she had a vague idea on the reason why I was taking day offs during the week and going somewhere. I have already changed jobs 4 times since I graduated from college. It's not that I have any particular complaints about any of the companies I've worked for. However, once I've been in a job for 3 or 4 years and get used to it, I get bored. Not that I have any ambition either. I just felt like maybe it's about time I tried something different. However, there was another reason why I decided to attempt this 5th job change. I'm already 40. I was thinking of settling down at my next job. And once that job gets secured, I was thinking of going to the next step with my relationship with Mary. So, I consulted with a headhunting agent and managed to get interviews with several companies, but my age was a barrier to get a new job somehow. I was considering giving up on changing jobs. And then came the demotion. I never thought that my job hunting would be found out by the department head. I can understand why your boss got pissed off. His trusted subordinate was secretly trying to change jobs behind his back. I had nothing to say to Mary's words. So anyway, I'm being transferred, right? So, when I tried to ask her to come with me, Mary cut me off sharply. I have my life here, building my career. Besides, I'm not obliged to follow you to such a remote place. We're not even married. After that, Mary and I got into a heated argument. Being at a disadvantage, I pouted like a spoiled child and took a nap on the living room couch. Then I began to reflect on my relationship with Mary since I met her. I first met Mary at a friend's wedding reception. She wasn't exceptionally pretty, but there was something welcoming about her face that drew me to her. She asked me about my job. I told her I had switched jobs twice and proudly said, "Staying at one company for too long is outdated." She nodded approvingly and said, "Johnson, you're very career-oriented, aren't you?" She was the one who suggested exchanging numbers. She was also the one who planned our dates for the most part. We became a couple within 6 months. And soon after, we started living together. You know how young couples are constantly giggling together over nothing. That's how we were. We never stopped laughing when we were together. Everything we did was fun. We really need to clean this dusty floor. True, but I can't be bothered today. We laughed our heads off simply at the thought of skipping cleaning of our apartment over the weekend. Fast forward to about 4 years from those happy days. When I started looking for another job, Mary, upon finding out, questioned my decision. Things at work were going smoothly and I was well compensated. I didn't have any issues with my coworkers either. Despite all this, she asked me why I was considering changing jobs. Well, because there's a company out there, you know. I jokingly replied, but she didn't laugh. It was clear that she started to doubt my true nature. She realized that my attitude towards work was not about career progression, but simply about being fickle. From then on, her look at me changed. Not just about work, but also about our relationship. Despite living together for so long, I never brought up the topic of marriage, and this seemed to trigger distrust in her. Fast forward another 3 years. We stopped laughing together and stopped doing things together. We felt there was no reason to live together anymore, but we also didn't have a reason to break up either. Amid this uneventful life, I suddenly received the notice of my transfer. I don't expect her to follow me to such a remote place. We're not even married. The idea of resettling the job and the relationship with Mary upon turning 40 was just my own selfish, wishful thinking. The new place of assignment was in rural Montana, way out in the sticks. The office was a rickety old single-story building that seemed to be decades old. 5 male employees of different ages and a 40-year-old woman named Susan, who was the director, worked there. While all the male employees seemed dull, she was different. With her clear-cut facial features and short hairstyle, along with her brisk way of talking and carrying herself, she was the epitome of a successful career woman. I couldn't help but wonder why such a woman was managing a remote office like this one. So, what did you do to deserve this? In a partitioned-off, makeshift reception area, I was summoned by the director Susan and started our conversation like so. I was at a loss for response. Then she informed me that unless I stirred up some sort of trouble, I wouldn't have been assigned to this sales office. She said, if you don't want to talk about it, I won't push you and change the subject. She explained that the primary task in this sales office is customer follow-up. Also, our assigned region is surprisingly big, so there would be a need to get around using a company car. She asked me if I had any questions. Well, my company found out that I've been looking for other jobs. I stuttered, oddly answering her initial question. Something about Susan made me want to share everything. Felt like a magic. Then, she opened my work history document that she had requested from the corporate HR department. So, you've switched jobs a few times before joining our company, huh? Yes, I tend to want to change my workplace when I get accustomed to the job. I replied and found myself repeatedly bowing to her subconsciously. I see I have a proposal for you, Restless Johnson. Will you be open to it? I found her bluntness rather refreshing. She then revealed her plan. Ever since her partner became the director, they had been hoping to improve the performance of this sales office by actively acquiring new customers. However, they lacked the right talent to achieve it. Would you like to give it a try? Consider it like switching jobs, she suggested. Her gaze held an undeniable intensity. I'll do it, I have no other choice, I thought. Even if it's a small sales office, if I could contribute to increasing the performance, I might be able to return to the headquarters. That's how my life at the new office began. Though I was expecting nothing out of it, it was surprisingly rewarding and made me hopeful for what we could accomplish. Every weekend, I would visit the apartment where Mary still lived by herself. There too, things started to change. I was eager for Mary to hear about my week at the new office. I would start trembling. At first, she showed me no interest, but slowly, she began to pay attention to what I was saying. It seems like you're actually happy about the transfer, you're weird. It's not a transfer, it's a job switch, a new job. I said it laughing. Mary joined in, calling me a fool. We both burst out laughing. My sales rounds gradually gained momentum, and the number of new clients also steadily increased. The sales office's performance was on an upward trend. Susan was also pleased, and we started to spend more time after work having drinks at the only pub near the office. The sales office, Director Susan, and we all enjoyed a smooth sailing period. However, on a Friday half a year later, Director Susan, who had been out at the headquarters all day, returned to the sales office in the evening. Unlike her usual brisk self, she looked as if she had lost her soul. I rushed over to her immediately. It's all over, everything. Susan muttered to me, then straightened her back, and announced the news to everyone. The sales office would be closed at the end of the next fiscal year. She asked everyone to start considering their next moves as soon as they received their dismissal notices, as there would be nothing she could do about personnel matters at that point. As she slumped into her chair, she looked at me. They're banning new sales activity too. We keep adding customers. It's going to be a hassle later on. Susan had said just that before she buried her face in her hands and slumped over the desk. The closure of our branch and the order to halt all new businesses were a shock to me also. What am I supposed to do from now on? I really wanted to hop on a train and talk about the situation with Mary immediately. However, as I was getting ready to leave, Susan talked to me. Johnson, would you join me for a drink tonight? Seeing the look on her face, I decided to postpone going home to Mary until the next morning and join the director for the night. No, I actually wanted to join her, because Susan and I had been after the same goal together for over half a year since my demotion. In a literal sense, we were comrades in arms. She and I had quite a few drinks at our usual and only pub. All the hard work you've put in, we managed to boost our performance, and yet they're pulling out, shutting down our branch. she grumbled, drinking heavily until she could hardly stand. What happened next? The following morning, as I started to tell the story, Mary leaned in, eager to hear more. I told her about escorting a thoroughly intoxicated Susan to her partner's house, which was about a 10-minute walk from the pub. There was a light on in Susan's house. I hadn't asked anything about her personal life until then, so I didn't even know if she was single or married. So, she's living with her family. I more or less carried Susan to the front door and rang the doorbell. A woman's voice from inside the house answered yes, and the front door opened. Susan, get a hold of yourself. The woman took hold of the drunk Susan, chiding her. Susan kept repeating, it's frustrating, so frustrating, under her breath. Who's that woman? Mary asked, looking puzzled. Susan's partner, I replied. Partner, I nodded slowly, and went on to describe the conversation afterwards between Susan and the woman. Susan clung to the woman in a childish and clingy manner that she'd never displayed at work. The woman gave me a wry smile, saying here we go again, before she took Susan inside, then came back to where I was standing at the entrance. Johnson, isn't it? Susan is always in your debt. She thanked me sincerely. Susan was sent to that branch because the company took issue with her living with someone who wasn't a spouse or recognized family member. I told Mary. Ever since, Susan had been living in a house they rented themselves, without receiving rent allowances from the company. As soon as I arrived at the office, Susan called me over to the reception area. The first thing she did was to apologize for her behavior on Friday, saying she had gotten so drunk she can't remember anything. I must have caused you trouble by having you take me home. And about what's going to happen from now on, Susan began, lowering her voice. She had decided to resign voluntarily, without waiting for the company's formal notice. When she was reassigned to this sales office, she was headhunted by a client company, she said. At that time, she decided to stay with the company that had demoted her without any wrongdoing, hoping to give them a taste of their own medicine. She wasn't sure if that client would still hire her, but she had several other prospects, so she was planning to look for a job after leaving. You know, my roommate suggested it might be better that way. And the roommate, Susan's partner, kindly suggested that Susan should lend a hand in my search for a new job if necessary. In other words, as long as I'm the director, I should be able to pull some strings. So why not use your pay vacation or whatever to help look for a new job? What do you think? Director Susan's words made me realize something. Since I was reassigned, I had sealed off the idea of changing jobs. That's why, no matter what order was handed down, I had decided to stay with this company. But the passive attitude would not do any good at this point. Now is the time to change jobs. But I was worried about what Mary would say if she found out I was changing jobs. That was my only concern. I contacted the headhunting agent again and started to look for a job. Thanks to Susan, the process of scheduling job interviews went smoothly. However, I couldn't find a company that would hire me. A month passed and it was time for the boss to leave the office. I wonder if I've meddled in your situation too much. Susan said when I told her that I was having a hard time finding a new job. At that time, I still had the option to stay with the company. On the weekend, I went to Mary's apartment as usual. Oh, I see your boss Susan left the company, Mary said. And then she asked me what I was going to do. When I made a nervous face, she smiled and said, you were looking for a new job, right? Over the past month, when I came here for interviews, I had lied and said I was called into the headquarters. But Mary had seen right through it. I told her about how Susan was supporting my job hunting. With Susan gone, what are you going to do with your job search? To be honest, I'm not sure. I replied, I haven't found any prospective options, so I might end up sticking with my current company until retirement. You mentioned it before, right? When we first met, that the concept of a long employment at one company is outdated, Mary said, resting her hand on my shoulder. She then spoke. She disliked the idea of changing jobs out of boredom, but would agree 100% if the purpose was to find what I want to do. Don't you want to find a new job? I nodded, albeit reluctantly, but I hadn't made my mind yet. Then Mary took out our joint bank statement from a drawer and showed it to me. With this much in savings, we can get by with just her income for a while. Leave it to me, so please take your time and find your next job. Inspired by her words, I resigned from the company, put all my effort into job hunting, and finally secured a job at my desired company. That weekend, Mary and I went out to the city to buy a new suit for me. By chance we ran into Susan. She was with that woman. We stood there, catching up on what had been going on in our lives. And how about you? Susan asked, stepping back and looking at Mary behind me. I took Mary's arm, led her forward. She's my partner. Mary gave a nervous nod. Oh, your wife is so beautiful and lovely, truly you make a wonderful couple. Susan and her companion agreed. I put my arm around Mary's shoulder and said yes, looking at her. Mary was caressing her shiny wedding ring on her left hand's ring finger with her right hand. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Your subscription and likes give us the motivation to continue our work. We are looking forward to your comments as well. We'll see